I beg your forgiveness in advance. What I'm about to say might be just the slightest bit controversial. Given the rapid expansion of Christianity and subsequent longevity of Christianity, Jesus, at least as we see him presented here today in the Gospel of Mark, is an unquestionably awful advertiser. In the time leading up to the passage we heard today, he had developed quite a following through his ministry of teaching and healing. People were so enamored by him that the crowds that had started to follow around him had grown and grown. This would have been the perfect time to capitalize on it, to galvanize this group of tentative followers into a committed movement. Now, I'll confess that I've never worked in advertising or planned grand strategy for a political campaign, but still it seems to me that this would be the perfect moment to use lofty rhetoric, to unveil an exciting plan for the future, while the disciples quietly passed around focus group tested signs reading with phrases like, "Jesus for Messiah." But instead of any of that, Jesus talks about how he's going to suffer. He predicts that those in authority are going to reject him. And before anyone can stop him, he tells everyone that he's going to be killed, like a criminal, before he rises from the dead. It is no wonder at all that Peter, who has devoted the last couple of years of his life to following Jesus, pulled him aside to ask, "What are you doing? This is not how you build confidence, not how you build a movement. And this is not where I thought any of this was going." And instead of responding to Peter's logic, he calls him Satan, tells him to get out of the way, and doubles down on everything he has just said. He goes so far as to say to the gathered crowd that the only way they can follow him is to deny themselves and take up their own crosses. It would have been an outrage and a scandal. It was absolutely unthinkable that God would or could act in that way. Unthinkable that the Messiah would arrive in anything but triumph. Unthinkable that the all-powerful God who created the universe, who liberated the Israelites from Egypt, and who later restored them to their place in Jerusalem, would choose to act in such a disgraceful way. This was not how the Messiah was supposed to come. The imagined glory, the mighty works, and the defeated Romans leaving with their tails between their legs has been replaced with the prospect of rejection, humiliation, and death. In the eyes of his closest followers, Jesus went from the Messiah everyone was waiting for to an embarrassment in just an instant. From mighty conqueror to unmentionable scandal. And if we're really honest with ourselves, the suffering and the cross Jesus speaks of that were so scandalous then, they're really just as scandalous today. Personally, I find myself more comfortable contemplating the mysteries of Christ's incarnation, his earthly ministry and his teachings, and the post-resurrection accounts. I'm far more comfortable contemplating all of those than I am his betrayal, his suffering, and his death. It's almost as if we want to bracket out those parts of the story. Yes, they're necessary parts of the narrative, but let's not dwell on them. Because the concept of a humiliated God makes no more intuitive sense to us today than it did 2,000 years ago. All of which makes Jesus' follow-up to his rebuke of Peter all the more important to pay attention to. If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. Now, especially in this season of Lent, it's easy to hear calls to deny ourselves as calls to take up something akin to super rigorous Lenten disciplines. But that's not really what it's about. Jesus isn't asking those of us who follow him to enter into a life in which we beat up ourselves constantly. He's not asking us to spend our lives wearing hair shirts and living alone in a desert. But if that's something that you feel called to, don't let me stop you. Instead, he's inviting us to get out of our own way. He's inviting us to live life with a new set of priorities, a life that will allow us to die to ourselves and to find new life in God. Denying ourselves and taking up our cross isn't about continually punishing ourselves. It's about being continually transformed and molded into living, breathing icons of Jesus. As a kid, I had regular contact with a group of men who took this call to self-denial to extraordinary lengths. There was a group of Episcopal Franciscans who made their home not far from where I grew up on Long Island. From time to time, we would visit the friary, or one of the friars would come and visit us at home. Each time I met one of them, I found myself in awe of these strange men in their flowing brown robes. A sense of utter joy was palpable across the grounds of the friary, and it seemed to follow them wherever they went. At that point in my life, all I knew about them was that they went to church a lot, baked really tasty bread, and that Brother Dunstan was as excited about playing with toy trains as I was. When I was older, my sense of awe at these friars only grew. Dunstan told me that after the Second World War, he realized that a Franciscan is what he needed to be. He said he didn't think he was able to follow God like he needed to outside of the order. And so he gave up the possibility of a career, the possibility of a family, and even the ability to make life decisions on his own in order to follow Jesus. He gave up everything. And still, Dunstan would have said that he got the better end of the deal, that the rich life he lived, splitting his life and ministry between work in Trinidad for half of the year and work on Long Island in the other half, would never have been possible had he not been willing to give up everything. And while for most of us, the self-denial that we are called to won't look anywhere near so stark and drastic as that, the transformation in our lives will be equally dramatic. In denying ourselves, in taking up our cross and dying to the world, we begin to see the world with new eyes. It becomes easier and easier to see the face of God in those we meet out on the street, in our offices, and coming through those big red doors. And with this new vision comes the drive to start acting in a way that might cause a friend of ours to pull us aside and ask, "What are you doing? You really sure about this?" And with that, the desire to start making our own scandals begins as we fall into step in that great line of saints following Jesus.